That's awesome. All right, hello everyone. Thank you, Jenna, for that kind introduction. Yeah, I hope that my talk can sort of help continue the conversation about about human nature interaction and marine mammal disturbance. There are a lot of overlaps with the discussion that we've been having and the work that we're doing. So like I said, or like Jenna said, my name is Ryan. I'm a second-year PhD student at Stanford in our EIPER interdisciplinary program, and I will be chatting about some work that some collaborators and I have started surrounding marine mammal monitoring as a collaboration between researchers and community members. So a little bit about what we'll chat about today. Give some background on the study site, the population we're thinking about, the incredible group of volunteers, community scientists that are supporting this work and that are really the inspiration for what we've started. We'll talk about a population decline or a potentially perceived population decline in the population that we're interested at this site, and some of the work that we are trying to get started to determine whether or not that perceived decline has roots that are environmental or disturbance-based. So we'll talk about the study, the research questions, and the design that we have that we're getting off the ground to try and investigate these questions that incorporate some monitoring equipment like what you can see in that photo on the right at our study site. We'll talk about where the project is at and where we think and hope that it will go in the future. So we were really interested in the Phoca vitulina, the harbor seal or common seal population. I'm sure that most, if not everyone in this group is well acquainted with these cute little guys. They're of the least concern for the IUCN, but I don't need to tell this group that they're very prone to disturbance. When they're hauled out on the beach, they can be particularly skittish. They react very easily to anthropogenic disturbances, noises, visual disturbances, things like that. And on our study site, which is West Beach at Hopkins Marine Station, we're seeing a potential decline in their abundance at that haul out site. The study site is really interesting. It's super important. It's a year-round haul out site and one of the largest rookeries in the Monterey Bay area, and it enjoys some uniquely nested protection. So it's within the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. It also exists inside of the Lovers Point State Marine Reserve, and it's also in the MPA of the Hopkins Marine Station. It's behind a fence. It's on the private property of this research institution. You can see here, West Beach is that really nice little cove beach that's set back from Hopkins, but is on the property and protected by a fence. But like Jenna said, I study the urban-ocean interface, and I think this picture does a really good job of exemplifying how West Beach really is that kind of an interface, and it's a really interesting example of it, where it's highly protected through regulatory and governance mechanisms, but it abuts immediately to the coastal recreation trail, where everything from cyclists to runners to loud conversations to even those super loud little three-wheeled motorized car things will drive by all the time. It also abuts right up to Ocean View Boulevard, which has been experiencing an increasing amount of traffic, increasing amount of roadwork and noise. So without anything in between the road and the beach, there's a lot of sort of sound energy and disturbance and things that go on the road that impact what happens on the beach. So like I said, there's a group of incredible volunteers based around the BayNet group that does an incredible job, not only educating the community about these seals and sharing why they're important, but also gathering some incredible data. This started with the late Professor John Pierce from the University of California at Santa Cruz, who from September of 2003 to October of 2019, while he was living across the street from this beach, which is West Beach, was taking daily population counts. So we have an incredible data set of daily population that's hauled out on the beach. Starting in October 2020, the BayNet volunteers and their affiliates have been gathering an expanded data set, continuing that population count and also expanding into distribution across the beach. They've started identifying and tracking individuals, and also tracking some disturbance responses, which is what we'll get into a little bit more. So here we see that perceived population decline. I want to caveat this with 2007 was the establishment of the Lover's Point State Marine Reserve. So we see this huge spike immediately after, which is a really encouraging sign that the State Marine Reserve is probably doing its job. It was really helping in allowing those seals to haul out in greater numbers on this beach. But then following 2009, we see a pretty steady decline over the next decade and a half of seals that are hauled out on the West Beach. Including this year, we see generally the lowest numbers of hauled out seals since since the State Marine Reserve was established. So what's going on? We're approaching this as a very hypothesis generating and sort of open process, trying to understand whether environmental variables might be explaining this decline in harbor seals hauled out on the beach. Things like sea surface temperature, trends, fish abundance, others, and we're approaching that with some conventional data exploration, statistical modeling, things like that. But what I'm interested in this group's perspective on and sharing with this group is we're also really curious about disturbance level thresholds that can cause behavioral responses. So for this, we're exploring some in situ monitoring techniques with audio and video, and really focusing right now as we're piloting these methods on understanding those auditory disturbances, whether signal to noise ratio thresholds, so essentially, singular noise events that are more or louder than the average noise that these seals are experiencing, whether that's sparking behavioral responses. This is our focus partly due to the prevalence of traffic and construction that's going on Ocean View Boulevard. And it's also there to inform future development projects. There are proposed hotel developments in the vicinity, some continued roadwork and construction proposals. And we're really trying to understand what kind of signal to noise ratios and decibel levels are going to consistently spark responses so that we can help inform those kinds of practices to make sure that they're not harming and disturbing the population for this extremely important and unique and special rookery. And then we're also coupling that with the incredible monitoring that's already going on from these volunteers. We've worked together with Kim Aikman and her fellow volunteers with the Baynet group to sort of readjust what they have been doing and readjust what we're doing to sort of bring them together so that the data sets are complementary to one another. So as I said, just very briefly, we've been thinking about those environmental factors a little bit and have been generating some interesting hypotheses. This is one of our early analysis looking at, on the x-axis, biomass per unit effort, essentially a proxy for how much fish biomass is in the bay, and that's derived from the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program, another incredible community science group that is starting to maybe hint at some relationships where higher fish abundance might mean fewer seals hauled out onto the beach if they are, which lends to the hypothesis that they may be foraging more, spending less time hauled out, more time out on the ocean or in the bay. But those are very early hypothesis generation, but we're really focusing on ramping up the human disturbance side of this so that we can compare that and see sort of the whole picture of what these seals are dealing with. So we have started the process of piloting some monitoring equipment. In the spirit of our theme of trail cams, we're essentially trying to create a trail cam that is a little bit more customizable, open source, low cost, and we're really prioritizing creating something that is can be customized to a use case, is low cost, open source, and easy to use. What I study and my real passion is integrating community science into the research process. And by doing that, we're really doing this sort of open source, low cost approach. We're really hoping to create something that with just a couple of pages of simple instructions we can send along to any community group to deploy anywhere. So it's based on a Raspberry Pi, which is a low-cost open source single board computer, very low power requirements, really low barrier to entry. And then that interfaces with some really simple Python scripts. So there's no outside applications or anything like that. It's just like 30 lines of code that we can share with the community that creates this sort of customizable program. So the current status here is what we've started so far. We're piloting this out on West Beach. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see there's a weather station that already exists out there that we've been able to utilize so that we're minimizing the amount of infrastructure we need, the amount of sort of construction and disturbance that we would have to sort of subject the seals to get this out into the environment. And in the lower right image, you can see the single board computer setup with our mouse and keyboard attached to it. It's very small. It fits inside that little black Pelican case. And then that's connected through that blue network cable up to the camera. So the audio is recording really well. We have on that lower left image, you can see a very high-tech garden shovel that is halfway buried into the dirt with a microphone, an outdoor microphone zip tied to it in a super high-tech advanced approach to situating a microphone. The video recording is a little bit less cooperative. This is still very much in the pilot stage. For anyone who has worked with these kinds of single board computers before, you'll know they work really well once you figure out how they work. But until you sort of figure out exactly how the pieces fit together, they can be a little bit finicky. So we're also doing this with those human monitoring data sheets coming in and bringing data together and coupling those with the audio and the video. So next steps for the monitoring equipment. So I showed you this schematic. We want to update this a little bit. Like I said, we really want this to be deployable out to any community organization. And we know that we're very fortunate to be on a large marine station with things like power and Ethernet, and the ability to pretty easily go out and manipulate it and take storage devices off and replace them and things like that. So we want to manipulate this and expand it into a little bit more of an autonomous station that can be deployed anywhere. And part of that is integrating solar power or battery, integrating cellular connection and direct cloud storage so that it really can just be put out there, left for the foreseeable future, and toss its data onto the cloud for analysis and viewing sort of back on shore remotely. So general next steps that we're working on right now, and always open to collaboration in these next steps, is continuing to integrate those in-person monitoring data with the remote monitoring. Right now, we're still a few months out from the pupping season, but are really interested in getting this put together for the pupping season. That's when disturbance sort of has the highest stakes. So we really want to get this ready and gather data during that time. We want to finalize the remote monitoring, obviously. We also want to expand to some haul out sites that are pupping only, that aren't necessarily year round, and see if those kinds of sites have different behaviors than a year round haul out site that the seals may be more familiar or comfortable with sort of day to day. We also want to expand community science and education partnerships, which is one thing I'm super excited about engaging with this group on, is finding new partnerships to work with, new groups to bring into this and share the lessons we're learning and share the scientific process with. We're also really just here to form new hypotheses. Like I said, we're going into this with a very open mind of wondering what's causing these perceived population declines and what could be causing disturbance responses that we've seen observationally. So always looking to form new hypotheses and see where the data takes us. So I want to quickly acknowledge we have an incredible team of collaborators, including Doctors Danielle Halsey and Megan McKenna at the Hopkins Marine Station, Professor Julia DeLeo on the faculty there, Chris Garcia, our engineer extraordinaire that helped me build all of these things, and Kim Aikman, and really the whole group of volunteers that spend hours at that fence watching the seals, educating the community, and making sure that the population is safe. So with that, thank you very much for the time. Like I said, we're always looking for collaborations. This project is still, as you can tell, very, it's kind of in its infancy. We're still piloting it. We have a long way to go and a lot of opportunities. So anyone with interest in collaborating and working together, please feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Folks, if you have questions, raise your hand or pop them into chat. I'm actually going to start off the questions. I don't see any hands raised just yet. Cara may have a few. My question, I'm just kind of curious. So I'm thinking about the harbor seals. How do you think the State Marine Reserve is positively impacting that haul out and pupping area for harbor seals? Why would that have such a pretty dramatic positive effect?
It's a good question. And it's one that I wasn't sure the answer of. I had some ideas, but wasn't sure the answer of until a couple of weeks ago. There was a boat that was anchored right off West Beach, maybe about 200 yards. And that boat being there really disturbed the seals. I think auditorily, the sound of the engine certainly woke them up. But just it visually being there and sort of in between the cove and the open bay, they flushed, and it took them several days to really come back in their normal numbers. So I think that just the access controls that the State Marine Reserve, that Lovers Point, sort of implemented into the system, and this is obviously very anecdotal, but I think that has a really big influence on whether or not the seals feel comfortable and safe, really returning to that beach in significant numbers. So I really think it's sort of I would suspect that it's really driven by those kinds of, reduction in boating, reduction in anchorages, things like that.
Cara, do you have anything?
Yeah, Andy has a question. Any data regarding the increased presence of white sharks and the loss of kelp?
It's a really good question, and that is sort of our one of our first next steps is predator presence. Something we're really interested in, and there's work being done at Hopkins in the block lab on, we have an acoustic buoy out not far from this beach as well that tracks sort of tagged white sharks. So that is certainly something we're interested in. We've done a little bit with kelp abundance and haven't found statistically significant relationships there yet, but those are in super early analyses. So it's something we're continuing to work through. But if anyone has sort of, data sets on white shark abundance, orca abundance, those kinds of things, and, is interested in or thinks those analyses that they might play a role in this, please let me know. We're definitely open in sort of the data gathering process of this. So yeah, thank you, Andy. I think that's a great suggestion and a path we're going down.
Karen Grimmer says the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary has an intern working up the data that Kim Aikman has collected over the past number of years. The case study should be available in early 2023. And then she says, great work.
Yes, absolutely. Kim and I have chatted about that project as well. And that one is, so in the last year or so, as we've sort of moved out of COVID and ramped back up roadwork, they're doing a really good job collecting the roadwork side data. So that should be a really interesting case study, and we're eager to see the results of it.
Great. Jan has a question or a statement. I think one of the biggest challenges for the seals at Hopkins these days is unaware kayakers who come into the cove. It would be great to have some kind of education outreach to the private kayaking groups in the region. Sadly, we don't have good maps of the areas for folks to use as a guide.
Yes, I certainly agree. And as Hopkins, it's one of the things the challenges we've really had is, we sort of have jurisdiction at Hopkins over the high tide line and up, but have limited ability to, sort of control kayak access. So Jenna, I think this is something that, sort of gets to your outreach with the kayak groups and what the incredible work that you all have been doing. And yeah, I completely agree. And I know Kim has relationships with some of the kayaking groups around the Monterey Bay area, but it's an ongoing process. And, it's like some of the comments in discussion earlier. Ultimately, it's challenging to get tourists to listen sometimes. So it's an ongoing challenge, but it's an important one. And I think it does have a huge impact. Paddle boarders too really freak the seals out.